So this young chap is somebody I have cycled from Paris to London with an organization called Tech Bikers, along with other 77 startup founders and crazy people who are making things happen in business world, but also liking to contribute back to society, raise money, and also just kind of put themselves through a bit of a kind of pressurizing situation of cycling. So Ben, please tell us, who are you?
That's a good question. 39 years old, no good answer. I started in IT and then moved to a computer game called RuneScape, which some of your listeners may remember. It was quite popular in its time. I started as customer support, and then after about 3 years, they'd sort of thrown me up the executive pipeline. And it was just a super high growth business. So it was a lot of late hours and just long weeks. But I then moved downstairs to a startup, didn't know anything about startups, couldn't understand how we had such nice offices and all this free food, and we didn't seem to make anything that made any money. And I just couldn't understood it, because RuneScape was, at the time I was there, we had 1 million paying customers every month, paying $5 a month. So it was a pretty big deal for back then. I mean, we're talking 1996, 1997, maybe around then, maybe mid late. No, that can't be anything close to the truth. Could be 2002. And then I moved to London, and then I set up something called the Three Beards, which was a networking event for the London tech scene, and that became quite popular. And then I was asked to join Number 10 Downing Street, and so I went and advised on the Tech City project for a year. And then I left. I went back to another startup called Unicorn Hunt, which we exited 2 years later. And I've spent the last 2 years advising the Tunisian government on how you use digital to increase democracy, especially in emerging countries.
Yeah, so you've had quite a journey, and pretty much everything you did has had massive resonance in London. And at one point, it was impossible to go to a startup related event or be in that Silicon Roundabout without bumping into you somewhere, or somebody who was like, I'm going to meet Ben and do something at a Ben's event and stuff like that. So those were just quite special times. So with regards to purpose, what is the purpose of business to you these days when it comes to stuff that you're getting involved in? And I noticed the other day, and the reason why I reached out is that you said you're getting involved in yet a new business. So what is how are you seeing it now that you're a wiser man?
I guess luckily the sort of purpose hasn't changed, and experience is only talking the same thing, which is, you can't be in business just to make money. You have to be focused on making people happy. And the people you make happy are your customers. Never forget that. And it's not about how you want to make them happy. It's about how they want to be made happy, if that makes sense. So your purpose is to facilitate happiness and hopefully get paid for doing it. And that's, I think if you take that approach, you'll say yes to quite a lot of things. But you'll always know when you're not doing it right, because it won't feel correct. You won't feel that joy. You won't get, the energy reflected back that you're trying to put out, which is quite a hippie way of thinking about things. But I'm quite hippie, so there we are.
Yeah, and that kind of, there's an element of love there and care and being sensitive to what makes people happy, really. So that's all those kind of quite hippie things. Good hippies are good at that. So
well, I think my frustration always with business, when I was sort of growing up and not really understanding it or having seen any exciting ones or been near exciting ones, was that they were just all so boring and just so dull. And I just think when you're a kid, you just can't, I always hated shopping. I mean, I hate going to the supermarket. Yeah. I still do.
It's like a chore. A chore.
Because I don't think they've got their purpose sort of nailed. And I think they've forgotten it in a race to scale and grow.
Yeah. So what is the core thing that you can share with regards to people then, when it comes to working with people, serving people, maybe building teams and things like that? You now worked with so many different types of people as well.
Mm.
What is the kind of like one perhaps unifying sort of string that brings it all together in a sense?
I've always worked on the principle of saying thank you, and I've always just found that if you just say thank you every day to people for turning up and doing their job, it's just, that's all they need. That's, you know, people just want to be seen and acknowledged,
Yeah.
right?
Mm-hmm,
That's,
mm-hmm.
they want to feel that what they don't want, and everyone's had this feeling a day, you know, the end of the day, when you've had a frustrating day at work and no one speaks to you as you leave, and you sort of sit on the tube and you think to yourself, I don't even know I am there. Nobody noticed me leaving. No one said goodbye. And it hurts, you know, and you're just being emotional.
Yeah.
And you go and have a drink and you calm down and you say, it's just a shit day and it's fine. But I've always found in my businesses that acknowledging people's energy, their work, you know, who they are, but also trying to work out who they may want to be, especially with young people and people who are, you know, people gave me such encouragement and love that I always feel it's important to kind of try and give that back as much as possible. And yeah, I mean, it's not always possible to manage people perfectly. You know, we're all bags of emotions, but I think if you try to be kind first and sort of say thank you, that gets you quite a long way into not being a dickhead boss, basically.
Yeah. Yeah.
And also a dickhead co-worker. You know, nobody likes, there's that. Yeah, it's kind of like, if you don't think there's a dickhead at work, you may be the dickhead. Sort of, you know, maybe if you're like, everyone's amazing and still frustrated, it's like, you're the bad fit here.
So when it comes to systems, both you and I are developers, perhaps at heart, or certainly to start off with. But then, you know, we had to grapple with all, you know, the people, the businesses and communities and so on. What is a kind of systemic takeaway that you can share, or that what's the first thing that comes to mind when it comes to either building systems or setting up systems for businesses and so on? And perhaps how has it changed since, you know, we first got into the like interwebs? Because nowadays I say to people, like, it's never been harder to build a web page than today.
It does sometimes feel like that. You know, I think so. There's been some, you know, in my, you know, it's a long career now. You know, I remember agile burn down charts and waterfall charts and a kind of weird fusion of stand-ups, but the sprints dictated, and then we've kind of moved into this pitting people against each other, sort of agile, pick your own cards, work on what you want kind of thing. And now I think we're finally seeing the emergence of mapping being the kind of the system, which is really trying to understand the cartography of whatever you're trying to do. So whether that be sort of system architecture, you know, thinking quite intelligently, taking the time to do the upfront thinking of sketching the product. What does it look like? How does it function? Where can we save ourselves heavy lifting? What are the off-the-shelf products that we can use if we're a startup that needs to just get somewhere? It's that sort of stuff that if you just start working, you'll discover some of these answers, but you won't have really mapped it. And so then you're just sort of working in the blind. And I found when I was doing stuff with Unicorn Hunt, unless I was incredibly clear with myself exactly how I was going to do the actual programming, I would just wander off into sort of just, I'll go and do that now and I'll fix this. But I found if I just walked around Amsterdam with a notebook, thinking almost the program through, then I could just sit and type it out and just, you know, it wasn't as much fun. It wasn't that dynamic, exciting, oh, I'm fixing things. Oh, I'm making stuff happen. Oh, I've done that. Oh, what's that? It was a bit more that thing. And it felt, it was quite useful. And I think the same about kind of community. And I also think the same about how businesses themselves function. You've got to understand effectively the inputs and the outputs to use programming language, you know, and who's got undue processing power effectively. And the hierarchies aren't often very clear, especially in modern business. They're so flat, but so they're interpersonal. So you've got to kind of map that piece as well of, so it's, for me, it's always just about being, I often look like I'm not doing any work. And I quite like that, because then I know I'm giving myself time to think. And for me, that makes it much more effective to get stuff done. And it enables you to be creative without the constraints, so you can play with the ideas and everything in your head and then start to figure it out. And then that, for me, feels a lot more, it's more exciting at the beginning and a bit more boring at the end, but you kind of get an end result that sort of feels a bit nicer.
Yeah, it's like it has to, an idea first has to work as a thought experiment properly, and then you have a chance of actually coding it up and making it work especially as a repeatable process and a system and maintainable and so on. So what's happening with innovation in startups and in businesses today? Are we innovating more or less or different? What's going on?
I think it's always hard to know. Effectively, each sector is now engaged with tech, and so everything now has tech associated to it. So farm tech, sex tech, wellness tech. Everything's now a technical product, but quite often they're not particularly innovative by and large. So there's always, quite often it's just a simplification of a previous tedious process that's now just been automated, but it's still not, I don't know if I'm jaundiced these days or just blind to the innovation, but I find myself becoming just less and less impressed. The last thing that really impressed me was a voice transcription system I saw on Product Hunt and was like, that's cool. Yeah, that's really well done. There's some great products, by the way. I think we've really nailed product design and user experience on the internet. But I wonder how much innovation there is, because so much is open source APIs that get you to where you need to be quite quickly, but the actual complexity or the actual algorithm isn't particularly it isn't proprietary for a start, and then it isn't very innovative because it's fixing a myriad of problems. You can kind of throw AI at anything, but to what end and why? There's so much human information you still have to use and train, and it's shortcuts rather than, I think, building new bridges or greater cathedrals that at the moment, and I find that a bit disappointing. But again, a lot of innovation has become diluted because people aren't taking risks anymore with the internet. They're not being massively adventurous. I mean, the most exciting stuff's probably sat around in the dark web and some of these slightly more secure networks that people are trying to build. And what Vince Cerf is still doing with this interplanetary internet. There's still stuff happening, but it's so fringy and it's so rare, and no one wants to hire rebels. No one wants to hire the person you can't control anymore. That's not okay. You can't do that. Yeah, I've been thinking a lot about this. I just finished a great book called Where Wizards Stay Up Late, about the history of the internet from start to from the absolute beginnings in the 50s all the way up. And it's just been making me think about, I don't know if we'd be able to get the internet built these days in the same way that it's emerged, just because people were just writing blank checks to solve problems, really. And I just wonder if we're seeing that anymore in the same way.
I mean, last night we stayed up until quite late coding up a bunch of stuff. And I was saying to my colleague Mo, it's like, man, I think most people still don't understand how much of a human invention URL is. Like URL is such a powerful thing.
Yeah, it really is. It's it's yeah, it is mind blowing to think what computers have now become, and in a weird way, because they've become so sort of productized and consumerized, they've lost some of that charm of being able to hack on them and break them, and have to learn to fix them. You know, it's quite hard now to. You're so abstracted away from the machine. They just put glass and colors in front of you. There's no real. It's quite hard to teach people what's going on inside a phone these days, and I find that loss of abstraction is probably it's probably quite crucial. You know, we can't now see how the machine works, and I think it's so hard to imagine it for most people.
Yeah, because I got into computer programming way back in old Yugoslavia, where I'm originally from, and we managed to somehow have a Commodore 128, which I had, and then it was like you just kind of turn it on, and it's like a blue screen, and now it's like, what do I do with this? Yeah. And it was like, find out. And we couldn't speak English. So we're like kind of reverse engineering coding from like misloaded games, when they would throw up some code and we'd be like, what is this code? What's this? And we'd actually learn to code by reverse engineering these kind of error codes. and a few months later, we're actually coding our own shoot 'em up games. And I still today, I look at like, I don't know how to code up a shoot 'em up game today. No way, no chance. I didn't even know where to start. So it's kind of like we've been dumbed down in some sense. So what are the products that are, or maybe you could share some of the stuff that you're working on now, but what are the products are catching your eye these days?
So just for a little bit of self-promotion. So we're just coming out of stealth for a SME lending product. In essence, quite a lot of how to take money has been sorted, automated. Thank you, Stripe. Thank you, Shopify, etc. And some of those, going back to the history of the internet, some of those real problems of taking money online have been solved. But there's another problem, and COVID has made this worse, which is SMEs suffer from getting a lack of credit. And quite often it's because the lenders don't know how to model risk correctly, because building a data set is too complicated. But the data sets already exist. We just import them, clean them up, provide that, and then if there's lending opportunities available to you, we tell you what they are and what it costs, and that's it. So it's always free to the customer. We provide them with data analysis for their products, let them know how the Shopify site's working, for example. And then after that, we give you opportunities to get credit against your previous sales. So I still think there's a lot to be done in fintech. I still think it's a slow place to change. Open banking had a huge effect on that. So I still think there's still lots and lots of industries that need the product thinking that we managed to get to over the last 20 years of building things, and working out that value chain. So I find it, I do find it still not strange, but it's interesting that product, UI, UX, and sort of engineering have sort of split into three different disciplines, when I always kind of assumed what would happen would be get people who could think incredibly creatively about product, could have the imagination to design, but could complete that through code. Now, those people exist, by the way, but I thought we would have more of those kind of multimodal individuals. And instead, we've seemed to have gone into specialisms of product. Now, I'm not to say there's not shared knowledge crossovers, but it is interesting that those have become three clear roles within HR's mindset. And I'm often reminded that's the right way round. Like, almost everyone needs to be good at product if you're making a consumer product, I think.
Yeah, so I've always found it very, very strange, because if I'm, pitching for contracts and, for a client to hire me for what I do, I moved from full stack developer to front end developer to then UX guy to then a UX consultant / business consultant, all that kind of stuff. And I'd say, well, I can still do full stack development. I can still do UI, right? So they're complementary to UX design. And if I'd say that to a client, they just go like, how do you know all that stuff? Like, it's basically like seen as a detriment. It's not an advantage. It's like a disadvantage. And so like, how don't people know all that stuff? Because if it's been in the web world for 10, 15 years, you better know all that stuff, because you're going to have to now hire 4 or 5 people just to build you a web page. And it's like, that shouldn't really be like that.
It doesn't feel like another old and grumpy developer. We just say, what variation of a list in the sky are you building this week? Because fundamentally, that's what a lot of products feel like. It's just a variation of that. And yeah, so I do wonder if we'll see a return to the kind of mythical full stack developer who can think about a product, because I would like to see product teams going away and building competing products, because you want that diversity of thought.
Yeah.
And so I don't know.
Yeah, no, it makes sense, but I totally agree with you that the companies are basically like afraid to try something new, afraid to say, well, let's spend next 2 weeks, give a few people in the company free reign to build something that they feel viscerally is necessary here. We'll see what happens. If they don't build it, well, fine. If they do build something that's worth it, let's put some more resource behind that.
But I just wonder if the person who's prototyping the product isn't fully switched on the technological limitations. Well, it's actually the other way around. If they don't know what's possible or what could be possible, then we just kind of hit a lower shelf of, we just did, here's your login page, here's your sign up form. And it's all that same old wizard that it used to be from the 90s. It's still a step-by-step process. It's still not very clever. People don't really bother seeming to use Touch ID, Face ID. Do you know what I mean? There still seems to be a bit of a gap between what the computer is capable of, what the internet is capable of, and then what the products we get out of that. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
it still feels a bit
totally
lacking given the ingredients at our disposal these days.
Yeah, because the awareness is the technological and technical awareness isn't there in the people who are governing the product development to actually say, hey guys, there's this cool thing that we could actually integrate into our offering and service. Just recently, today actually, I had someone send me like a sort of recruitment agency and said, we are moving forward and we now have like a chat bot through which you can interact with us. And it's just basically a form that's set up as a chat bot, but it's like kind of really poorly implemented. It's like a really ugly thing as well. And it's just basically a form that I filled in. But it was like, okay, so they're calling this innovation and a sort of modern thing. And I was like, this was like 7-8 years old kind of thing, that they just somehow managed to kind of string in. But yeah, so what's happening with regards to money? Should companies be raising money? Have you been reading this kind of around this unicorn versus camel businesses? And what's your take on money raising and building cash flow, all that kind of stuff?
Again, I always think it's important to try and build a sustainable business as quickly as you possibly can. There's huge, running fast requires people. People are expensive, especially within London, and thus the amount of capital you have to raise is associated with that. I think we've been raising for a few months now. It's, there's hesitancy at the moment because of the economic sort of climate, because of the pandemic. But we're optimistic. I don't want to say too much more, but we're optimistic. We try not to take too much. We don't like to be greedy anyway. Because I think being lean is quite helpful. You know, I like small teams. I like small companies. So we optimize for efficiency on that. But the sooner you can get to money, the better. And it is frightening in my experience of dealing with startups that there's a little bit of a confusion that someone will just write you a check and and not expect you to tell them when that money's coming back or how does it come back. And I think it's a little bit of the myth that Silicon Valley produces, which is these people you've never heard of just raised $20 million to build some flying nitrogen AI-driven vehicle. And you just think that's insane. But there's months and months of planning and sketching and modeling that has to occur for that deal to go in any place. So I think there's kind of a youthful naivety for many youngsters who are trying to build a startup because it's often looks like a young person's game. And I think it's what you going through the fundraising process very quickly means you have to understand your business inside and out, and you have to know how it works. And as someone who is not good with numbers by and large, I have to think about that in my own way. That gives me effectively the result I need to be aware of. Whereas there's a lot of I think there's quite a lot of entrepreneurs, especially the as yet successful ones, who are still just having to learn those numbers, those metrics, those KPIs, and have that in relation to a strategy, because quite often they don't have a strategy. They just have a burn down chart that says, I'm going to spend your money, and then, by that point it should be fine. And you just think, no. So, but then I'm very skeptical about, B2C products. I always think if you can make a lot more money doing B2B than you can B2C. But yeah, back to product, it's always a bit harder to make exciting products in B2B because someone's paying you for it. So, if we look at Quibi or something, that's quite an interesting product, but made no money and it's had to return whatever's left. Whereas if you look at, I don't know, Pearson or some other educational, the technology is poor, but the content is what people are happy to pay for. And it's not as interesting, but it's more useful to the business. And I think that's, much easier place to play in. If you can solve business problems for money, it's much easier. Much easier.
Yeah, I personally, I'm very, very excited about enterprise type technologies and certainly that B2B. And what I see also as emerging patterns is technologies that are sort of like white label platforms that end up being effectively B2B2C type setups, where you're serving a business, but that business is then exposing your platform to their customers, to either like customer support or time tracking or all sorts of things like that. And that's particularly interesting space.
There's quite a lot of that, isn't it? Kind of sort of fintech or sort of bank in a box kind of, sort of fintech as a set of a SaaS play. We'll handle all the hard work for you for a cost to see if you can make it work, which I guess for some businesses, that's what they see. They're just a kind of pure brand play. And you can get there, you can get your inflection points up and you can see if you're doing it. But then you've got technical decisions, I'm not going to call them technical debt, but technical decisions that you didn't make. And now you've got to re-architect while still serving, so then you've just got this, hellish landscape of two systems and then a migration problem. And as you're building the new thing better, that data source gets further and further away. So I'm always, it's a bit like, building on the back of Twitter used to be back in the day. It was just like, don't do it, no, because they can just turn you off and then you're screwed.
Yeah, and that certainly, I mean, I hacked together 3 very, very interesting things on the back of Instagram API. and they all lasted 2 months before Instagram changed their API so significantly that all my thing crashed and didn't work at all. And I didn't know that it didn't work until people started saying to me like, hey dude, this doesn't work. And I was like, these people are dumb. And I go like, oh no, they're not dumb, it doesn't work. And I didn't know it doesn't work. It's hard to test for API changes as well, unless you build it like super robustly from the start and so on.
Yes.
Um,
Yeah, it's a challenge, that.
yeah. So what happens? We had, let's say 5, 6, 7 years ago, it was like the growth hacking thing was like wildfire, right? I think those growth hackers have kind of like died out a bit. But what's the true growth? How do you achieve true growth in a startup?
I'm of the big believer, but that's probably my background, is, again, map your communities, identify your potential customers. Don't go and sell them anything. Go and give them something and see if they want to have a conversation with you, and then introduce your product. You can do that across any channel in any way. Now, growth hacking, I never knew what it was, by the way. It just seemed to be people showing memes and telling me they could make me money. And that always felt probably false. So for me, again, I'm not a huge fan of Google ad spends really, or Facebook ad spends, or promoted ads, because it just, again, it's inauthentic. It has a purpose that the consumer completely understands. And you're probably going to get pulled into some horrible marketing funnel page that you didn't want to be at anyway, because of how targeting ad works. So if you can, it sounds arrogant, but if you can own the conversation for your customers and identify the problems they're having with their business, and you can produce content and products that solve those problems for them, and it comes with a free toy, you kind of win. What you've got to work out is how can you generate that, and how can you produce, I'm a big fan of product as marketing. I'm a big fan of providing little widgets and tools for the SMEs or whomever to mess around with and play around with, because my experience of my friends who are SMEs is it's hard enough just for them to keep going and just keep their head above water and manage everything that they've got to manage. And it weirdly makes me think that tech startups are quite chill. Like, we've got all this process in place. We've got all this automation. We've got all this, when I look at my mate who runs a brewery and my mate who runs a coffee shop locally, I think, God, that's a lot of work you guys put in to get your money. It's a lot of, and
it's
there's
real.
a lot they don't yeah, it's a big deal, and there's a lot they don't understand in a certain way, in the way that tech has created a very metric driven sort of growth strategy. But if you talk to a coffee shop about that, it's just, we'll just make coffee and we'll just put it up by a couple of p a week, or it's because we're not asked to create 10x multiples. The growth, it's just kind of keep the doors open and get some people in and see how I do. So your sort of alignment of growth becomes very different. But it's lovely when you encounter a young owner of an SME who has got, I want 5 coffee shops, I want 10 coffee shops, I want this. You just think, yeah, great,
Yeah. I remember once speaking to the guy who founded a chain in London called Coco di Mama, which sells like coffee and pasta and stuff like that. And I said to him, like, how did you find this? What happened? He goes, I was working in the city and it was, up to there, with just kind of 9 to 5. And I decided to start my own thing. And I said, how are you going to, I just kind of, because I walked out of a tech company, right? It's like, how are you going to achieve that exponential growth? And the guy's a mathematician. He goes, dude, you know what you're even talking about? If I wanted exponential growth, that means I would have to open two shops this week, 4 shops next week, 8 shops week after next. I was like, oh, okay. I didn't mean like in literal sense, but I was like, okay. So,
well, I know that one of the USPs for the grind chain is David has a tech background, and he basically built himself a little management app that lets him see what is happening across all of his stores in real time. He's kind of built the Google Analytics for his coffee shop. And again, it's kind of, there's just not a lot of that, even just, you're a busy guy, you want to know, the sorts of things that McDonald's has spent millions and millions on creating in the 80s, and then again in the 90s, and now again, it's that sort of stuff. There's always, I always think there's an opportunity to bring that knowledge down, that enterprise thinking down to the SME.
Yeah, because every company is an enterprise, even with just like one person working in it, maybe hacking together an app that can, and kids have done this with all those like little apps that went viral and so on. And it's like now you suddenly overnight need to sort of manage this in a lot more enterprisey way, yet you're just kind of still pissing around in your bedroom. And it's like, I've got, I don't know, 50K coming in per day on an app or something. And so crazy times. So Ben, that was fantastic chat, man. I really appreciate you coming on and sharing your wisdom, like from the soul, so to speak. Where can people find out more about you? Is it time yet to mention what you're working on, or should people just get in touch with you, via LinkedIn or something? And who are you looking for? What kind of customers are you looking for potentially?
So in the initial stage, we're looking for people with e-commerce platforms. So if you've got a Shopify, you've got even a Stripe.js integration, you've got Zero, for example, or a Cashflow, anything that you can basically, we've done people with iZettle. Anything that you can basically show us what the previous behavior was, and then we can run it through the algo on our side. And then that's what we use to produce a report to the lenders. And then we share that report with you. So there's two views. We're not there yet. We haven't even got a website ready, but that's coming next week. I'll jump up and down on LinkedIn all about that. I guess watch this space. You can find me on Twitter on In the Company Of. We're excited. This is good. This is a lovely opportunity and a space to play in. So I'm excited to see what next year brings.
Awesome.
Can it,
Yeah, I'm also excited to see what you come up with, because every time you've come up with something in the past, it's always kind of really caught my attention. I've ended up using it. I've ended up not being able to, avoid it, even if I tried. So it was like, that's why I really wanted to speak to you and go okay, I've learned now from your previous ventures that this stuff is very, very likely to, do something like really traction based.
You'll definitely hear about it. I can guarantee you I'll be noisy. I hope that we build the product to be sticky enough that it does what we want it to do. But we think it's a compelling opportunity, and we think people will love what we're offering, which is a nice feeling. That's a nice thing to wake up and go, yeah. I know the people who would want this. I know them and I like them, and want to help. So you start from those premises. It often is quite easy to be useful, I think.
Yeah. I mean, my kind of pretty much the only experience of trying to raise money for my own company so far has been going off and speaking to a Barclays branch manager. Right. And I've been business account with Barclays for 15 years, whatever, solid cash flow, earnings, all that stuff. And I just said what would be what would be a chance of me, for example, let's say taking 10, 20 grand, of loan. And the guy goes, well, do you have a house, right? And I said, yeah. And he goes, well, if you put your house as a collateral, then we can do it. I said, no, dude, I'm asking for my own business, right? I don't want to put my house. And he goes, oh no, then not. It's like, what? I've been banking with you guys, literally put more than $1 million through in the last 10 years. And you don't even give me 10 grand based on, I've got 50 grand coming in the next 4 months, whatever. And he still doesn't want to lend me 10 grand. It's like, what the hell is this?
No, I mean, they don't seem to care. They just there's an arrogance which is just unbelievable, really. Because it is you know how hard it used to be, again, fintech's kind of solved some of this, but it used to be bloody hard to open a business account. I mean, I think we waited 3 months or something with the 3 beers, all said and done, all the forms.
Yeah.
And again, you put all of your money through it, you run all your payroll through it, you're doing everything you should do correctly. And then there is no credit facility for you because your turnover per year is less than £1 million. And you're like, if I had £1 million a year, I wouldn't need to borrow 10 grand, would I? That doesn't make any sense.
Exactly.
So it's fixing that problem.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, I'm really looking forward to see what you guys come up with, and definitely keeping an ear to the street there. And thank you so much for joining us. I can't wait to see what you think. Well, I'll send as soon as it's ready to be looked at. I'll send it over for your thoughts. I'd love to hear them. Thank you so much. Cheers.
Nice one, dude.
Bye.
Cheers, man.